Welcome back, everyone, to the Wisdom of Laozi.
Great to be back.
Today, we are stepping into what is, without a doubt, the most controversial and dangerous intellectual minefield in all 81 chapters of the Dao De Jing.
That's absolutely right. I mean, if we were going to vote for the single most, let's say, dangerous or Machiavellian, maybe easily abused chapter in the entire book, Chapter 36, the one we're talking about today, it would win hands down. It's really caused, 2 millennia of philosophical headaches and political maneuvering, too, across East Asia.
Yeah, it's one of those chapters that gets quoted all the time, but it feels like it gets twisted just as often.
Huh.
I think we really have to start with the words themselves. They seem simple, but, well, depending on how you read them, they can be utterly chilling. Let's hear what Laozi actually says in Chapter 36.
Okay, let's use the DC Lao translation. It's quite clear. It kicks off with these 4, pretty stunning dialectical proverbs. They set up this pattern of reversal right away. If you would have a thing shrink, you must first stretch it. If you would have a thing weakened, you must first strengthen it. If you would have a thing laid aside, you must first set it up. If you would take from a thing, you must first give to it.
Okay, so that really sets the stage. It's this ultimate paradox, isn't it? Achieving your goal by doing the exact opposite thing first. But then the chapter gives its summary. And that infamous political ending, the part that's really stirred up all the trouble.
Precisely. It wraps up with this. This is called subtle discernment. The submissive and weak will overcome the hard and strong. The fish must not be allowed to leave the deep. The instruments of power in a state must not be revealed to anyone.
Wow, just hearing that laid out, especially that last bit, that warning about the instruments of power, it immediately gives off this calculating, almost, sinister vibe. And for centuries, this passage, it wasn't just some abstract text. It was revered by, countless people, rulers, generals, ambitious ministers, as the Bible of power dynamics.
Oh, absolutely. You look at someone like Han Fei, he's the great synthesizer of the legalist school, writing centuries after Laozi, right? He absolutely adored this chapter. He openly, you could say, weaponized its wisdom. He explicitly turned it into this cold, hard tool for, cementing monarchical despotism, for keeping absolute control over the bureaucracy.
So this wasn't just philosophy discussed in quiet rooms. This was practical politics. Generations of emperors and their, let's say, cunning advisors treated this like a secret manual, a kind of dark arts operating handbook almost, poring over it day and night, trying to figure out how to manipulate the court, the people.
It sounds exactly like that, doesn't it? Every word seems brilliant on the surface, but then every line seems to have this chilling, calculated feel. And that leads us straight to our core mission for today. We need to attempt an intellectual clarification, sort of a rescue mission, you could say, to try and pull the real Laozi out from under this historical fog of Machiavellianism, out from 2 millennia of, frankly, political misinterpretation and weaponization.
Right. And the key disagreement, the real fork in the road for understanding this chapter, it boils down to one fundamental question, doesn't it? Is Laozi just describing an objective cosmic law? Yeah. Is he simply observing the natural, inevitable rhythm of the universe? What goes up must come down.
Or, and this is the crucial alternative, is he actually prescribing a subjective set of rulers' dark arts? Is he actively teaching an offensive strategy? Calculated, premeditated manipulation, a guidebook on, say, retreating in order to advance. That difference, description versus prescription, it changes everything. It turns the text from physics into, political strategy.
So to navigate this ancient intellectual maze, we're going to first explore that seductive dark arts perspective, see why it was so compelling for so long. Then we'll look at the fierce philosophical defense that later Taoists mounted. We'll bring in some modern tools, to help refine our understanding. And finally, we have to confront the ultimate paradox this chapter throws up, a challenge from Wang Fuzhi that seems almost impossible to solve, and see if we can find the key within Taoist thought itself. Okay, let's jump right in where the trouble really started. Part 1, the fork in the road. To really get Chapter 36, we first have to clearly separate these two, diametrically opposed ways of reading it. Like we said, it all hangs on 2 key questions. Who's the subject? Who is actually doing the acting, and what's their motive?
Exactly. How you answer those 2. That's what determines if this chapter leads you towards the great Tao, or down into the realm of petty political tricks.
So let's start with reading number 1. The Machiavellian Handbook View. This was pioneered, really codified by Han Fei, and then carried on by commentators like Heshang Gong. This is the interpretation you hear most often, the sort of practical reading that sees those 4 proverbs as an active, operational how-to guide for grabbing and holding on to power.
Right. In this framework, the subject is clearly I, the ruler, the strategist, the cunning minister, whoever wants the power. And the motive, the driving force, is explicitly desire, the Chinese word you, when the text says, if you would, or if you desire to. That desire is the absolute key. It implies I am taking active, premeditated steps, designing a plan to achieve a specific, usually self-interested political goal.
And Han Fei, well, he was philosophically primed for this view, wasn't he? I mean, he was a legalist. He believed the only way to keep order and maintain centralized power was through absolute control. Enforced by strict laws, sometimes terrifying methods, he didn't really have much time for Laozi's ideas about natural flow or wu wei, non-action.
Not at all. Legalism demanded that the sovereign be calculating, opaque, unpredictable even. So Han Fei looked at Laozi's dialectic, this idea of seeking the positive through the negative, and he interpreted it purely as cold-blooded political conspiracy. He saw that natural cycle of reversal, and his thought was basically, okay, how can I exploit this knowledge for my regime's benefit?
And his famous example for, if you would take from a thing, you must first give to it. That really illustrates this cynical perspective perfectly. Tell us about Zhu Xi of Jin again.
Ah, yes, the Duke Jin story. It's a real masterclass in calculated deception. So the Duke wanted to conquer the smaller state of Yu, which was neutral. But first, he very deliberately gave them things. Precious jades, magnificent horses, to the ruler of Yu. This wasn't generosity. He was lulling them into a false sense of security, making them feel indebted. You accepted the gifts, thought Jin was friendly, let down their guard. Only after this strategic giving did Duke Xian launch his attack and conquer them completely. The giving was just a necessary step, a calculated cost, purely a precursor to the taking. It's that kind of political patience married to ruthless intent.
Chilling. And Heshang Gong, the Han Dynasty commentator, he was just brutally honest about this kind of premeditated malice, wasn't he? Especially in his note on, if you would have a thing laid aside, you must first set it up. He links it directly to desire.
He really doesn't pull any punches. He says the reason for first setting someone up, like promoting a powerful minister you actually want to get rid of, is the explicit desire to make him arrogant, extravagant, so that he naturally attracts envy, misfortune, maybe makes a fatal mistake. The goal in promoting him is specifically in order to accelerate his downfall, to ensure he falls into peril and basically self-destructs.
That's incredibly dark because it flips what looks like royal favor, kindness, into essentially a death sentence. It's like that metaphor we talked about, the greenhouse killing with praise.
Exactly that. The ruler, harboring this secret, dark intention, you acts like a gardener. He wants to eliminate an overmighty plant, a powerful minister, but chopping it down directly. That looks bad, messy, might provoke suspicion or rebellion.
Right, so
Instead, he showers it with fertilizer, more power, more responsibility, and intense sunlight, public praise, honors, titles. His true desire is to force this plant to grow so big, so bloated, so top-heavy that its roots rot or its stalk just snaps under the pressure. The minister self-destructs, topples over from his own weight, and crucially, the ruler's hands stay clean. He maintains that image of the benevolent leader.
it's insidious. And this active human calculation, it even twists the meaning of subtle discernment, Wang Ming, doesn't it? Shenglong sees it almost like a martial arts concept.
Yeah, he interprets it as the dim mak, or the death touch. The idea is the method used is invisible or subtle. You can't see the mechanism, but the result achieved, that's obvious and clear pulling, it's an unseen method designed to produce a very visible, often catastrophic result, like a hidden move that leads to a clear knockout.
Okay, after laying all that out, it really does make Laozi sound like the original godfather of conspiracy and manipulation. But, and this is the critical pivot point, we absolutely must turn now to the other side. Reading number 2. The physics textbook view, championed by thinkers like Wang Bi back in the 3rd century, and much later by people like Hanshan during the Ming Dynasty.
Right, and this view argues completely the opposite. It says, Chapter 36 isn't an operating manual for rulers at all. It's more like an observation notebook for understanding the universe. Here, the subject isn't I, the ruler with desires. The subject is the objective trend of things, Zhu Xi. The underlying logic isn't human desire, but that profound Taoist principle. Reversal is the movement of the Tao. See, Tao's the dawn. Or often put simply, Wuji Bifing Bi, when things reach an extreme, they must reverse. It's a law of nature.
So in this reading, the sage isn't that intervening gardener actively plotting the downfall of his rival. He's more like a cosmic physicist. Someone who simply observes these internal self-correcting laws that naturally move things toward their opposites. And crucially for this reading, active desire, you, is completely out of the picture.
That absence of you is the absolute key philosophical difference. Wang Bi puts it very clearly. He says, the sage follows the nature of a thing and lets it destroy itself. The sage isn't intervening. He's practicing why action, or maybe better, non-interfering action. He's not imposing his will.
Let's think about the metaphors for this natural law again, like the rubber band and the stock market bubble.
Right. Laozi isn't teaching you how to weaponize a rubber band to snap at someone. He's describing a physical law. The more a rubber band is stretched, the more internal potential energy it builds up to shrink back. That's just conservation of energy, a basic principle. Same with a market bubble. The more it gets strengthened and inflated, the more inevitable its eventual collapse becomes. This process doesn't need human malice or any premeditated calculation. It's just the inherent nature of things that get overextended.
And Hanshan de King, he takes us deeper with that cosmic waveform idea, right? Using simple things like the cycle of the seasons or the sun rising and setting. Every peak, whether it's strength, being set up, being stretched, is already inherently pregnant with the trend toward the trough weakness, being laid aside, shrinking. The sage is simply reading the universe's rhythm. He's not conducting the orchestra, he's just listening to the music.
My absolute favorite analogy here, the one that really demonstrates the wisdom of non-intervention, is Wang Bi's Jenga tower logic. Think about it. The hard and strong player, maybe an arrogant one, keeps stacking the blocks higher and higher. The more he sets it up, the stronger the tower looks from the outside, right? But internally, its structure becomes progressively weaker due to instability. It's getting closer to collapse with every added block.
Okay, so in the Machiavellian view, the ruler watching this might think, aha, now's my chance. I should nudge the table just right to make it fall. Calculated intervention.
Exactly. But the sage, guided by the physics of the Tao, thinks something very different. He thinks, I don't need to do anything. He just quietly observes the structure setting itself up, pushing towards its absolute limit, until inevitably, by its own inherent physics, its own internal weaknesses, it destroys itself. No push needed.
Wow. The difference is stark then. One is a strategy of active design, using the law to attack for selfish gain, driven by desire. The other is the physics of passive observation, understanding Zhu Xi, the trend of things, and seeking to align with that law primarily to avoid overstretching oneself and maintain one's own integrity.
It's a fundamental split.
Yeah.
And it forces us to walk this very fine line when we interpret the key phrases in the chapter. So in part 2, we really need to dissect those key concepts where these two readings clash head-on. The phrases subtle discernment, submissive and weak, and especially the instruments of power. These are really the knife edge of this whole debate.
Right, let's get into that. Debate number 1, subtle discernment. This phrase seems pivotal for understanding how the sage actually operates. Is it about hidden malice, or is it profound insight?
Well, the Machiavellian view sees it as the spy's sunglasses. It's about strategic cleverness that must be hidden. The core idea is concealment of your true intentions. You, the observer, can't see the spy's subtle planning. You only see his resulting clear action or the outcome he achieves. It's a one-way street, non-transparent calculation aimed squarely at deception.
Okay, but the physicist's view, the X-ray vision, flips that completely.
Completely. It argues it's not about hiding the self at all. It's about seeing the world more clearly. It's the power of deep insight, the ability to grasp the essence of a situation, to see through the surface appearances to the underlying reality.
Like, an experienced engineer, someone who has this sort of X-ray vision. They can see the tiny, subtle hairline cracks deep inside the concrete. That's the way, the subtle part cracks that are totally invisible to the average person. But the engineer understands that this tiny crack is the absolute predictor, the precursor to the dam eventually collapsing. That's the Ming, the clear outcome. It's about seeing the future trend contained within the tiny, subtle present.
Precisely. It's about foresight born from impartiality and deep observation. The wise ruler achieves the clear result, maybe preventing a disaster, because they discerned the subtle cause long before it snowballed into an obvious crisis. They act, if they act at all, not based on some hidden premeditated desire, but on preemptive knowledge of these inevitable natural trends.
Okay, that makes sense. Now for debate number 2. The submissive and weak will overcome the hard and strong. This is maybe Laozi's most famous line, his trademark. And again, it seems to take on two radically different meanings depending on the reader's intention.
Absolutely. The Machiavellian reader hears submissive and immediately thinks strategy. It becomes feigned weakness. A temporary tactic, a posture you adopt specifically to defeat an opponent, especially when a direct head-on confrontation looks unfavorable. It's fundamentally about deception, a tool to lull your opponent into a false sense of superiority.
And the classic example of this, the ultimate tactical embodiment, has got to be Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope against George Foreman, right?
Perfect example. Ali appeared submissive and weak. He leaned back on the ropes, basically letting the incredibly strong Foreman strengthen his attack, stretch his offense to the absolute maximum, punch himself out. Ali's intention was purely tactical, purely strategic. Let Foreman exhaust himself, effectively weakening him before Ali launched his final, decisive counterstrike. The apparent weakness was a calculated means to a violent, victorious end.
But the physicist's view sees submissive entirely differently, not as a tactic.
Not at all. It sees submissive as a fundamental choice of existence. The state of being water, as Laozi often describes it. Think about granite. It's hard, it's strong, absolutely. But it's also rigid, brittle. It's a high-risk liability, ultimately. Its destiny, when faced with sufficient stress, is to shatter.
Whereas water?
Water, conversely, looks formless, weak, yielding. But it's incredibly resilient, adaptable. Ultimately, you could say it's indestructible. You can't shatter water with your fist. It just flows around the impact, absorbs the energy. Water's victory, its overcoming of the hard stone, is achieved not through a single confrontation, but through persistence, accommodation, resilience, and time. It relentlessly wears away the stone. So, in this view, submissive isn't a tactic for a specific battle. It's a fundamental state of being. Its victory comes simply by outlasting everything else in the cosmos.
Okay, that distinction is profound, and it brings us naturally to the final showdown, the real heart of the political interpretation. Debate number 3, the fish and the instruments of power, Li Qi. Han Fei's reading of this part is really what cemented the Machiavellian interpretation for centuries, isn't it?
It truly is. Han Fei looked at Li Qi, the instruments or sharp tools of power, and interpreted them very concretely. For him, these were the ruler's visible tools of control. Specifically, the famous 2 handles of legalism, reward and punishment. Think of them as the great hammers of the state bureaucracy, the things you use visibly to keep everyone in line.
And that line, the fish must not be allowed to leave the deep.
In Han Fei's chilling political interpretation, that means powerful ministers, the fish, must never be allowed to escape the ruler's absolute, hidden, and total control, the deep waters of the court's power structure. And the final line, must not be revealed to anyone, becomes an iron law of secrecy. You absolutely must hide the precise standards, the mechanisms for reward and punishment. Keep your ministers guessing, keep them terrified, make them totally dependent on your unpredictable will. If you reveal your playbook, your criteria, you lose that crucial element of fear.
But hang on. This interpretation feels so focused on external control, on manipulation. If the sage is meant to be following the Tao, aligning with nature, surely his instruments of power wouldn't just be crude political tools like reward and punishment.
Exactly. That's the core of the counter-argument from people like Wang Bi and Hanshan. They completely subvert Han Fei's reading. They argue that a state's true Li Qi, its real instruments of power, are not those external, visible tools of coercion or reward. The true instrument, they say, is invisible wisdom itself. It's the deep knowledge and the subtle application of following the nature of things. That's the power.
So Wang Bi compares it to gravity.
Yes, famously. He compares it to gravity. Think about gravity. It's formless, it's invisible, it's colorless. You can't see it or touch it. Yet it governs the movement of every star, every planet, every ocean, every single person. That kind of profound, invisible background law, that's the sage's true instrument of power. It works constantly, effortlessly, without needing to be shown.
Okay, that's a powerful metaphor. But then how do they explain the line must not be revealed? If it's not about political secrecy, what is it?
This is where Wang Bi's genius really shines in his defense of Laozi. He argues that must not be revealed is not a rule of secrecy imposed by the ruler, don't tell anyone. Instead, it's a statement of fact about the fundamental nature of this Dao-based power.
How does that work? If I'm a leader and I choose to operate invisibly, following this law of non-action, how does the simple act of revealing my power suddenly doom me?
Because the very act of revealing the true instrument is the act of leaving the deep. Think about it. If the invisible, submissive, water-like law of the Tao is the deep, the moment you choose to pick up that visible, hard hammer of force or punishment or overt control, the moment you make your power visible and hard, you have, by definition, abandoned the invisible power of the Tao. You've left the deep. You've traded the unbeatable, invisible physics for a visible, brittle hammer. And that hammer, because it's now hard and strong and visible, immediately becomes subject to the law of reversal. You've exposed yourself. You become a target.
I see. So the moment you rely on external visible strength, the hard and strong, you instantly activate the cosmic law that says what is hard and strong will eventually be overcome, will eventually break.
Precisely. Henshin, the king's metaphor, captures this perfectly later on. He says the sage's power is like being a submarine. Its strength comes from being hidden in the deep, submissive, invisible. The second it reveals itself, the moment it surfaces, it becomes a battleship. Yes, it looks hard and strong, but now it's a visible target. It has activated the law of reversal just by becoming visible and hard, and it has doomed itself to eventual destruction. So you see the contrast. In the Machiavellian world, the instrument is the big hammer you wield to control others. In the physicist's world, the instrument is the law of gravity you align with to govern yourself and, indirectly, the situation.
That distinction just changes everything, doesn't it? It completely reframes the chapter. It shifts it from being a guide on human manipulation and political tricks to being a profound lesson in self-governance, in aligning with cosmic law and understanding the physics of power itself.
Exactly. So now that we've kind of witnessed this ancient philosophical battle play out, let's turn to part 3. This is where modern scholars try to move beyond that black and white, either dualism of conspiracy versus physics. They try to offer a more constructive, maybe practical philosophy for how you might apply this kind of wisdom in modern life and management wherever. This is really the final step in our, let's call it, rescue mission for chapter 36.
Okay, so this brings us to modern scholars like Liu Xiaogan and his refinement of Wu Wei, non-action, into something he calls strategic non-action. It sounds like it's trying to bridge that gap, right? Reconcile active wisdom with passive observation. He defines Laozi's method as seeking the positive through the negative. That sounds a bit complex.
It is. It's definitely walking a narrow path. Strategic non-action is trying to be neither active conspiracy, that's too yukui, too much deliberate forceful action, nor is it pure passivity, which is just kind of yielding to whatever happens. Instead, it's about guiding the flow of events, but only after you have deeply perceived the underlying laws at work.
The absolute key here is that pre-perception step, that subtle discernment we talked about. You see the pattern first.
So we come back to that Taoist surfer metaphor again.
It fits perfectly here. The master surfer doesn't try to create the wave. That would be Machiavellian design. Nor does he try to fight the wave head on. That's the hard, strong, ineffective way. What does he do? He uses his skill, his discernment, his knowledge of the ocean to wait for and accurately predict the trend of the perfect wave forming.
And then, at the precise moment of maximum natural energy, he submissively, meaning without fighting it, aligns himself with that powerful natural energy. He uses the strengthening and setting up that's inherent in the universe and the wave's formation, and he rides it effortlessly to shore. He achieves his goal not by fighting or designing, but by flowing with the current he already perceived. It's the peak of efficiency, really, using nature's power instead of just your own.
Okay, but here's the tricky part again. If the surfer is strategically calculating the exact time and position to jump on that wave, doesn't that still involve calculation? Doesn't it still imply a certain degree of, well, self-interested desire to reach the shore? How do we really definitively distinguish this wise surfing from just clever legalist calculation? Where's the line?
That is the essential question, the really difficult, practical, and ethical question. And Liu Xiaogan knew this. He addressed it by suggesting 3 essential tests, you could think of them as moral guardrails, to help determine if a particular strategic action leans more towards Taoist wisdom or slips into Machiavellian calculation.
Okay, what's the first test?
The first is the time frame test. Conspiracy, by its nature, almost always seeks a short-term trick, a quick advantage. It often relies on secrecy and deceit precisely because it needs to work immediately before the target catches on. Taoist wisdom, however, is patient. It seeks long-term alignment with universal laws. It trusts in the eventual natural reversal. So the question is, does your action rely on a sudden surprise attack, a short-term gain? That's probably Machiavellian. Does it rely on the slow, inevitable momentum of nature, on long-term trends? That leans more Taoist.
Okay, time frame. What's number 2?
Number 2 is the crucial motive test. Conspiracy typically seeks a win-lose outcome, sometimes even a lose-lose outcome, if it means self-preservation for the actor. Taoist wisdom, rooted in the idea of the Tao as the source of all things, emphasizes assisting the natural way of all things. It seeks harmony. Therefore, its strategy should aim for a win-win outcome, benefiting all elements within the system, or at least not harming them unnecessarily. Are you acting for the benefit of the whole system or just for your own narrow self-interest?
Makes sense. And the third test?
The third is the attitude test. How does the person act? A conspirator tends to be rushed, secretive, deceitful. They're often anxious, constantly intervening, micromanaging details to ensure their plan works. A truly wise practitioner, aligned with the Tao, is patient. They can afford to be honest because they're relying on natural law, not tricks. They trust the Tao enough to be willing to let go, to accept failure if a desired outcome cannot be achieved naturally, or without doing violence to the system. So these three tests, long-term perspective, win-win motive, patient and honest attitude, they provide a kind of ethical framework for judging strategic non-action.
That's really helpful, and this all seems to lead towards a final reframing, one that many scholars think brings us back closer to what might have been Laozi's original fundamentally benevolent intention. It involves looking again at that most politically abused line, if you would take from a thing, you must first give to it, and reframing it using the farming model.
Exactly. The Machiavellian reading, as we saw, interprets this line entirely through the lens of the fishing rod model. I give this bait, specifically in order to take that fish. The focus, the motive, is 100% on the taking. The giving is just a necessary evil, a reluctant cost of doing business to get what you want.
But the farming model completely flips the meaning, doesn't it?
It transforms it.
Yeah.
The farming model says, if you desire to harvest, which is a form of taking, you absolutely must first sow the seeds and tend the ground, which is giving. Here, the focus shifts entirely to the giving, to the necessary natural effort required to produce a harvest later. The taking, the harvest, is the natural consequence of the prior giving.
So this suggests Laozi wasn't teaching us to be clever fishermen setting bait and traps. He was teaching us to be wise farmers who understand and respect the whole process of growth, of nurturing. If you take, you must first give, becomes simply the deepest, most profound way of stating that universal law. You reap what you sow.
Right. It reframes the whole principle. It becomes this powerful concept of, you might call it, moral conservation of energy, or maybe ethical physics. It's not just a nice platitude. It's presented as a profound, almost physical law of the cosmos. That genuine giving, genuine benevolence, generates an inevitable, guaranteed natural return. Think about a modern example. A CEO who generously gives stock options, delegates real authority, invests heavily in training employees. That's the sowing, the giving. What do they reap? Often, a decade later, they harvest deep employee loyalty, faster innovation, a stronger competitive advantage. That initial giving wasn't a trick to extract more work in the short term. It was a genuine investment in the health and potential of the entire system.
And the difference in approach is key, too. The Machiavellian fisherman has to constantly check the line, maybe change the bait, actively intervene to make sure they catch the fish.
Whereas the Taoist farmer, after sowing the seeds and doing the initial work, they largely trust the underlying laws of the universe, sun, rain, soil, to do the heavy lifting and bring about the harvest in its own time.
Okay, so we've worked pretty hard here to try and rescue Laozi, to reframe the chapter, to restore the sense of benevolence that feels central to his overall philosophy. But now we have to confront the ultimate challenge. In part 4, we need to face the self-criticism that arose within Chinese philosophy itself. Specifically from Wang Fuzhi, that titan of Ming dynasty thought, who argued very powerfully that Laozi's system, particularly involving Chapter 36, contained a fatal, irreconcilable contradiction at its core.
Yeah, Wang Fuzhi's critique is really quite devastating because it doesn't just target Chapter 36. It attacks the logical coherence of the entire Dao De Jing. He zeroes in on what he sees as a fundamental logical impossibility, a clash between Chapter 35, which famously says, hold on to the great image, the Tao and the whole world will come to you, and our Chapter 36, which ends with that stark warning, the instruments of power in a state must not be revealed to anyone. He says you simply cannot do both.
Let's play this out using that black box CEO metaphor again. Wang Fuzhi basically argues that a leader trying to follow Laozi perfectly faces this terrible binary choice. Is it going to be attraction or is it going to be security? Because, he claims, you absolutely cannot have both based on these two chapters.
Exactly. Scenario 1. The CEO chooses security, following Chapter 36 to the letter. He hides his core algorithms, his ultimate strategy, his unique insights. Those are his instruments of power, keeps them locked away in the deep for absolute safety from competitors. Okay, he's secure, but now he's a black box CEO. He's mysterious, maybe even uncommunicative about his real vision. Wang Fuzhi's question is sharp. If you hide your core vision like that, why on earth would the world come to you? You can't attract the best talent, the most loyal followers, if they don't know what you truly stand for. You directly violate the promise of Chapter 35.
Okay, that's choice 1. What's the alternative?
Alternative. The CEO chooses attraction, following Chapter 35. He boldly reveals his grand strategy, his vision, the great image, to attract followers, talent, investment. Okay, this might generate buzz, momentum, people might flock to him, but now his entire playbook is public knowledge. His competitors can see his strategy, they can analyze it, measure his strengths, pinpoint and exploit his weaknesses. Wang Fuzhi points out, correctly, that by revealing everything, the world will measure your limits and you inevitably lose your security. You become vulnerable.
It really does sound like a genuine catch-22. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. So what was Wang Fuzhi's final charge against Laozi based on this paradox?
His final indictment was incredibly harsh. He argued that Laozi's sage, when forced to choose between self-preservation, hiding the secrets for absolute security, as per Chapter 36, and attracting serving the world, revealing the vision, as per Chapter 35, will always choose self-preservation. And therefore, Wang Fuzhi charged, Laozi promotes a philosophy that is fundamentally selfish at its root. A philosophy that prioritizes the sage's own safety, even at the direct cost of, as Wang Fuzhi put it, the ruin of the world, because the sage won't risk revealing the very knowledge that might be needed to save it.
Wow, that critique really threatens to undo all the rescue work we've been trying to do. It paints Laozi not just as potentially Machiavellian, but as ultimately selfish and detrimental. How on earth do the Taoist defenders answer this deep logical contradiction that seems to pit security directly against attraction?
Well, the Taoist defense, particularly articulated by later commentators trying to resolve this, answers by arguing that Wang Fuzhi fundamentally misunderstood, or perhaps confused, two distinct but related layers of the Tao itself. Its underlying essence, the Dioteia, and its manifest function, the Yang. They argue these two layers must operate simultaneously, but crucially, one layer must be kept hidden while the other must be shared. It's not either a case, it's a both hand, but with different rules for each layer.
Okay, this sounds like the perfect place to bring in that nuclear reactor versus electricity metaphor to try and clarify this essence-function distinction.
Absolutely. So the Tao's essence in a Tiama corresponds to the instruments of Chapter 36. This is the core secret. It's the universe's ultimate operating system, the fundamental laws of reversal, the source code, if you like. Think of it as the nuclear reactor core. It represents the raw, potentially unstable, incredibly powerful, maybe even dangerous energy of how things truly work at the deepest level. This core essence must not be revealed. It absolutely must be kept hidden in the deep, safely inside the containment building. Why? Because if you try to reveal this raw radioactive core directly to the world, the result isn't enlightenment, it's instantaneous destruction. It's the ruin of the world, quite literally.
Okay, so the essence, the core mechanism stays hidden for safety. What about the function?
The Tao's function, Yang, corresponds to the great image of Chapter 35. This is the usable, safe product that the hidden reactor stably generates. It's the electricity that flows out. It's the light, the warmth, the peace, the security, the prosperity that arises from the wise application of those hidden core principles.
And this function, this usable product?
This function, the peaceful results of good governance, the harmony achieved by aligning with the Tao, this must be revealed. It must be shared. It must be sent out to every home, so to speak, precisely in order to attract and serve the world. That's how you allow the whole world to come to you. You don't show them the dangerous reactor core. You show them the beneficial electricity it produces. The sage reveals the positive results of his wisdom, but wisely conceals the profound and potentially dangerous mechanism or source of that wisdom.
That is a stunning resolution. It's not a contradiction after all. It's a layered system. The core, the instrument, the essence must be hidden because it's too powerful or too subtle to be exposed directly without causing harm or being misused. And the product, the great image, the function, must be shared, because sharing the benefits is the entire point of wise governance. The system is coherent, it's not a paradox, but a necessary design feature of dealing with profound power.
Precisely. The sage hides his deep, ultimate understanding of the laws of reversal, his subtle discernment, his ability to see the future and the present. But he openly shares the peaceful, prosperous, harmonious results of his governance that stem from that hidden wisdom. He hides the power source, but shares the fruits of the power. Wang Fuzhi's critique, while sharp, arguably missed this crucial distinction between the hidden root and the visible manifestation.
Okay. Our journey today, it feels like we've gone from the murky depths of Machiavellian strategy all the way up to these profound layers of cosmic physics and ethical application. It's given us, I hope, a really complete kind of 3D understanding of Chapter 36. And it seems clearer than ever now that this chapter isn't really providing a single answer. It functions more like a profound Rorschach test, doesn't it? It coldly, objectively reflects back your own choices, your own assumptions about power and motive.
That's a great way to put it. The Machiavellian reads it and sees tricks. They see calculation. They see a fishing rod designed purely to catch whatever it is they desire.
Whereas the physicist reads the exact same words and sees the Tao. They see inevitable law. They see the cosmic waveform, a pattern designed not to be exploited but to be aligned with.
And for us, maybe, the modern learners, trying to draw wisdom from this ancient text, we can distill from it the sophisticated leadership approach of strategic non-action. And maybe more fundamentally, that life-affirming faith inherent in the farming model. The deep trust that what you sow, you truly will reap. That giving leads naturally to receiving.
It seems Laozi's subtle discernment, then, is ultimately an invitation. An invitation to first perceive the universe's fundamental law of reversal, this constant ebb and flow, and then, crucially, to choose what we will do with that knowledge. Will we use this insight into cosmic physics to become more clever fishermen, just winning the zero-sum games of human power and manipulation?
Or will we choose to align ourselves with this law? To become patient farmers, sowing seeds of generosity and trust in the sunlight, and then quietly trusting in the Tao's eventual harvest. Knowing, perhaps, that the most powerful instrument of all is the wisdom that is never overtly revealed or used as a weapon against the outside world, but is instead used to govern oneself.
You know, perhaps the deepest meaning of the submissive overcomes the strong isn't really about how we cleverly defeat some external rival, whether it's a political opponent or a business competitor. Maybe, just maybe, it's ultimately about whether we can, through acts of giving, through cultivating softness and love, finally overcome the hard and strong attachments, the rigid opinions, and the selfish desires within our own hearts.
That's a beautiful thought. To achieve that ultimate self-mastery, to make genuine benevolence itself the highest, most rational reason for our actions. This perhaps is the sharpest and yet the warmest and ultimately the most powerful instrument of power that Laozi left behind for all of us.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.